As Mike said, my name is James. James Handley. I'm on the clergy team here at St Mark's. For those who don't know me, I don't actually work for the church. I have a day job as a computer programmer, as a software engineer, but it's my privilege to be part of the ministry team here. So as Mike said, we are running at the moment through this series looking at Holy Communion in different ways. And we're kind of halfway through, so I'm going to be speaking about that a bit this morning. Just before we dive in, for a bit of fun today, the images I'm using are all being generated by Microsoft Bing AI, which I think they're quite interesting. Hopefully you'll find them useful. If you get deeply bored by what I'm saying, which is always a possibility, then you can try and work out which prompts I use to generate the images. That could be a little game you can play. The other side of that is don't pin too much theological weight on the images. I mean, even in that one, it's struggled a bit with some of the words, hasn't it? But hopefully they just stimulate our thinking a bit and are something to think about. So here we are then, thinking about Holy Communion. I know that not everyone comes every week, and maybe you haven't had a chance to catch up on YouTube. So I thought it was worth just laying the foundations again and saying what it is we're talking about. So Holy Communion, or the Lord's Supper, or Eucharist, or the bread and wine, or Mass, it's all the same kind of thing, is the special service where we come to remember what Jesus did. And we have some bread and we have some wine, and come up to the front and receive the bread, and then come and receive a sip of wine. And we all share together of that same bread and that same wine. And it's a service and an act of worship that the church has always used, I think. And it's for those who are baptized, and ideally those who are confirmed, certainly within this tradition. But equally, I think we can have a conversation about what that means in practice for us. Certainly, we wouldn't want to exclude anyone who knows and loves Jesus and wants to remember him and celebrate him. So in terms of practicalities, that's what we do. We take bread and we take wine. Why we do it? Well, as I touched upon there, that reaches back to Jesus when he was on his time on earth. And in 1 Corinthians, we read this recollection of the event. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread. When he'd given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it, in remembrance of me." So the reason that we do it, and the reason that we do what we do, is quite simply because that's what Jesus has told us to do. And we can pick out some of the key words in that passage. We can say, he took bread, and he said, "This is my body." And he took wine, he took a cup of wine and said, "This is my blood." And in both cases, he said, "Do this in remembrance of me." So at one level, it's quite simple. We do. We do this. We take bread and we take wine, and we eat and drink it in remembrance as he commanded. So that's hopefully laid a bit of a framework of what Holy Communion is, why we're talking about it, why we do it in the church. And in terms of specifically this journey that we're on at the moment, we're about halfway through. So we've had 3 sessions thinking about Holy Communion, and there's 3 to come, including this one. And Mike kicked off with the first couple, introducing a bit of what Holy Communion is and how it reaches back to the Last Supper, and then back to the manna in the desert and the whole Exodus story of God taking Israel out of Egypt. A couple of weeks ago, we thought a bit more about the practicalities, about the liturgy that we use, about how we meet Jesus. We talked about the kind of the whole split in the Reformation and the different understandings that people have of communion, and how the sense that we're consuming Jesus somehow, and he consumes us in the bread in particular. And then last week, Olivia spoke very movingly, I thought, about the breaking of the bread and how Jesus becomes known in that, and the intimacy of the act of sharing bread and wine with Jesus, actually, and Jesus becoming present through that. But what I want to say this morning is that communion is not just an act of looking back. It's not just an act of remembrance. It's not even an act for each given day as a church. It's also an act of looking forwards. And that brings us to our reading this morning. And particular bit here, if you hear my voice and open the door, I will come and eat with you. Now, this is taken from the book of Revelation, which it's quite a tricky book. I'm not going to mislead you about that. It's full of some quite strange imagery of dragons and lakes of fire and stars falling from the sky and horsemen of the apocalypse. It's a book that's actually caused quite a few problems for the church over the years. And the story is told of the person who's standing on a bridge and looking at the sunset. And another chap walks up and says, "Oh, what are you doing?" He says, "Oh, I'm just admiring this beautiful sunset that I believe God has made." So the first one says, "Oh, do you believe in God?" And the guy goes, yeah, I do. And the first one goes, "Oh, so do I. That's brilliant." And they stand for a bit. And then the first guy says, do you mind me asking, I know you believe in God, that's great. Are you a Christian or, a Jew? Or he said, "Oh, no, I'm a Christian. "Oh, that's amazing. So am I." And they shake hands. A few minutes later, would that be a Protestant? You Protestant Christian or Catholic Christian? And he said, "Oh, I'm a Protestant Christian." I said, "Oh, brother, so am I." And they have a hug, getting on really well. And then the first guy says, which denomination do you worship at? Are you Methodist? Church of England. "Ah, brother, I am in the Church of England as well." And they get out their phones and they exchange numbers and agree to meet up. And then the first guy says, "Your eschatology, are you a premillennialist or a postmillennialist?" And the first guy says, "Oh, I'm a premillennialist." And my friend, my brother in Christ, I also am a premillennialist. And they get out pictures of their children and they, share and all that kind of stuff. And the first guy says, is that a post-tribulational premillennialist or a pre-tribulational premillennialist? And the second guy says, "Oh, I'm a post-tribulational premillennialist." So the first guy says, "You heretic," and pushes him off the bridge. So it presents a little bit of difficulty. All the stuff about tribulation and millennialism and all that stuff is based in the book of Revelation. We're not going to go into it today. But the first bit of the book of Revelation, thankfully, is a bit easier to get our heads around. And it takes the form of these 7 letters that have been written to different churches in the ancient Near East. And the one that we heard read from this morning was to the church in Laodicea. And as a part of it, there's this invitation that Jesus issues that says, "If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come and eat with you." And one of the things that we have to bear in mind about communion is that it is actually a meal. Certainly the context of it in the Last Supper was when, I would love it if every Sunday when we had Holy Communion, we did it as an actual meal. That would be great, wouldn't it? But it is, it is a meal. There is real wine. We actually drink proper liquid wine. And there's also real bread. It's an actual loaf of bread. It's all served up on a real table. This is real stuff. It is actually bread we eat. It is actually wine we drink. And I think we can lose sight of that in a way if we're not careful and turn it into a purely spiritual exercise. But it's important that it's actually a meal because that's what this passage in Revelation is talking about. It's talking about the future and what will happen in the future. Because one of the pictures the Bible paints of what heaven is like, what the end times are like, when Jesus comes back, as we read in the book of Revelation, is that of heaven is being like a feast. It's like a banquet. You're sitting at the table. Jesus says in Matthew, I tell you, many people will come from all over the world to take their place in the kingdom of heaven. And there they will sit down and eat with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who were the founding fathers of Israel and the Jewish faith way back in the Old Testament. The Bible also paints this picture of heaven being like a wedding with the church, with us, with you and me being the bride, with Jesus as the bridegroom. He invites us to come to this great banquet, this great feast, this wedding in heaven as his bride. And when we eat our bread and drink our wine, that's like a foretaste of that meal that's waiting in heaven for those who accept Jesus. It's the tiniest taste. It's the tiniest foreshadowing. It's a bit like, I don't know if you've ever seen the teasers for movies. If there's a film that you're really looking forward to, and they put out like a 10-second teaser. And you watch it, and it doesn't tell you anything about the film at all. But you get some little taste of it. You get maybe an idea of the casting, perhaps what the kind of cinematography is. And I think this is a similar thing. We get just the tiniest taste of what it will mean for us to be in heaven and have this wedding feast. It reminds us each time we take the bread and wine that yes, we look back to what Jesus did. Yes, we remember that, absolutely. But we also look forward and go, this is what's in store, this meal, this feast, this banquet with God. But we also don't want to lose sight of the today aspect of it. And if we look at the Lord's Prayer, so in the Gospels, the disciples asked Jesus, teach us how to pray. And he gives them what we call the Lord's Prayer, because it was from the Lord, which starts, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Hopefully you're familiar with it. We don't use it too much in this service. But this particular phrase here, give us today or each day our daily bread, does pose a little bit of difficulty. Because the most natural reading is give us our bread today. Give us our daily bread. That's not what Jesus said when he taught it. He says, give us each today, give us today our daily bread. And the problem that we have here isn't at all apparent in the English. So you have to forgive me for a minute because we're going to dive into some Greek. Again, the Bible is this book that was written over thousands of years. What we call the Old Testament, the first half of it, is all written in Hebrew originally and has been gathered together and translated and has arrived in English for us here. The New Testament, the kind of the back third quarter of the Bibles, was all written in Greek, in the street Greek of 2,000 years ago. And again, was written as individual letters and papyruses that have been gathered together and translated. But with this particular verse, the translation that has been done is potentially slightly misleading. So we've got give us each day, here we go, you're going to see if I can remember this, is Hemeran. So the Greek word there for day underneath is Hemeran. And our daily bread is epiousion. Now, I'll put my hands up, I'm no Greek scholar, but I think it's fairly clear that those are different words. We're not talking about day in the same way between those two words. And almost perhaps a better rendering of that is give us each today our tomorrow's bread. Looking forward to the kingdom of heaven. So there's an aspect to it where it's saying each day keep us in touch with what is to come tomorrow, that this tomorrow's bread. And it's something that encompasses the totality of our humanity. It's our head as we think about it, we are rational, we remember. It's our heart and our emotions as we remember what Jesus did. It is, of course, our spirit, but it's our bodies. It's our guts. It's God in our guts as we take the bread and wine. And so what we end up with is this thing of the now and the not yet. So it is now. It's bread and wine here and now. It is a physical bit of bread that we eat in communion. But it's also a not yet. It's tomorrow's bread. It's the bread of heaven. And God is inviting us to this kingdom, to the feast that is to come, that's made possible through Jesus. But it's a feast that also breaks into today. Holy Communion is sustenance for today and a foretaste also of what is to come. It's now and it is not yet. And I just wanted to finish off this morning, if you'll indulge me, by just saying a little bit about what Holy Communion means to me personally. And when I come up and receive Holy Communion, it's a lot of it is about community. Especially I have the privilege sometimes of administering communion, which is a huge joy. And we're taking one bread, one loaf of bread, and one cup of wine, and we're sharing it. We're doing it together. It's a community activity. You can't have communion on your own by definition. You can't, even a feast and a banquet is not really a feast and a banquet on your own. So we have one bread and one wine that we share. It was really interesting in COVID how that disrupted that and the different ways that we dealt with it. And it's a joy that we can now share together again. But also for me, I find communion, and again, don't necessarily pin too much theological weight on this, but I find it a bit like a reset, a bit like kind of turning off and turning on again, if you think about my work. So if I've had a difficult week at work, maybe a project isn't going so well, I've maybe let down some of our clients, or I've been a bit short with colleagues, or I've made some poor choices about what I've eaten, or going to bed late, or watching telly, or whatever, then communion isn't a chance for me to just come and go, God, I've messed up. I know I have. And it's a reset. It is like a computer that's got itself into a state. Nothing's working. Everything's crashing. You turn it off. Everything shuts down. You turn it on again. It comes back up, and it's clean and new and working. For me, communion is a bit like that. For those who play Mario Karts, I don't know if anyone does here, I don't know when you're kind of driving along, and if you drive off the edge of the track, you kind of fall down into this abyss, but then a helicopter comes along and rescues you and takes you up and puts you back on the track and goes, off you go again. And it's almost a little bit like that. I've driven along and I've gone off on one and I'm falling down into the abyss, and the helicopter comes through communion for me partly and puts me back on the track and goes, right, come on, fresh start, that's gone. Let's go on again. So it's a retrospective thing, but it's also a future thing. It's about sustenance. As I take communion, the bread and the wine, I have a sense of Jesus with me, Jesus in me for the coming week. And that is something I find just really helpful and comforting. So we have this meal, this actual meal of bread and wine that's remembering what Jesus did, of course, but also a foretaste and a part of the invitation to join with God in the great feast of heaven. And it's an invitation that's open to all of us, and it's open now. Jesus invites you, come and feast at my table.
Thanks, James. As you were talking, I was just aware that image of give me today something of tomorrow is also true in prayer as well when we have this time of ministry. Give us today something, when we ask for God to provide for us, it's like the gifts I need, not only just for today, but also for tomorrow as well. And healing particularly is something about give me something of tomorrow today. And I just wonder if it'd be good to do that. So would you please stand and just ask God to give us